I think the biggest misconception about composting is this idea of browns and greens.
Right.
So the idea is that when you make compost, you have to get the right ratio of material so that it actually processes, that things actually decompose. And to make that simple, people have come up with this idea, well, you need browns and you need greens, and you mix those browns and greens in a certain ratio, and that makes the perfect ratio for making fast compost. Right? And I believe that for years.
And just so our viewers, fast compost, what do you mean when you say fast comp? Just so people know exactly what you mean.
Depends a bit on your climate, but let's say you're summertime, so it's fairly hot. You're probably looking somewhere between 1 and 2 months.
Right, 1 to 2 months for the compost to be ready to be. It's not. It's broken down enough to put it. It's just the black stuff that looks like soil, but it isn't.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that one too.
Okay. Okay. Great.
But yeah, so it's what we call finished. So it looks like soil.
Yes.
Right?
Okay.
Yeah. It's very dependent on, what you put into it. It's dependent on your temperature very much. In cold climates, nothing happens in winter. It depends on the moisture levels and so on. But if you're making good, fast compost in a warm climate, yeah, it's about 60 days.
Ah.
Right. Okay, so we have this brown and green ratio, yes. And the ratio that you're heading for is a 30-to-1 ratio of browns to greens.
Okay.
Well, here's news for you. The whole idea of browns and greens is completely wrong and doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
Right.
Okay. The benefit of it is that it's a simple way to explain to people that they need to mix different things. And so the browns and greens comes from the fact that, well, in fall, we have a lot of brown leaves and they don't have a lot of nitrogen. They're mostly carbon. And most brown things are mostly carbon. So old stems, straw, a bale of straw, most things that are brown are carbon with very little nitrogen. The green stuff is like your lettuce leaves, a stem of celery, whatever. It's green. Grass clippings, they're green. They have more nitrogen than carbon. Oh, sorry, that's not quite correct. They have a high level of nitrogen relative to carbon.
Yes.
Right. The important thing is we need to get the carbon and nitrogen ratios in the right ratio so that we get processing taking place. Why is that? Well, remember, it's the microbes that are doing all this for us. And microbes, well, they like a certain diet, and they like a 30-to-1 ratio of carbon to nitrogen. If we give them lots of carbon, they can't eat the stuff because there isn't enough nitrogen to help them digest the carbon.
Right.
If we give them too much nitrogen, then there's other chemical reactions that take place that makes the pile toxic to them and kills them.
Right.
So we have to get this ratio right because that's what their diet is.
Right. Right.
That's why we're doing this. We have to feed the microbes in that pile the kind of food they like. And so that's that ratio.
That makes sense.
Well, the first thing is that this 30-to-1 ratio that people talk about has nothing to do with browns and greens. It actually has to do with carbon and nitrogen, not browns and greens. And that's really quite different. For instance, you might have some brown coffee grounds. And you say, oh, well, that's a pail full of brown stuff. Well, no, actually, coffee grounds are it's a green.
It's
because they have a lot of nitrogen in it.
Yes.
Same with manure, which is brown. But it's actually a green.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
You have leaves. Well, 1 week the leaves on the tree are green, and the next week they're brown. Like, are they browns or are they greens? All right. So that's one reason the browns and greens are no good. But the other reason is that it isn't a ratio of browns and greens. It's a ratio of carbon to nitrogen.
Yes.
Right. The second reason it doesn't work is that when we talk about a 30-to-1 ratio, we're talking about the weight of material, not the volume of material.
Oh, I see.
Okay. Whereas gardeners like to work in volumes. A shovelful, a shovelful of green to
Yeah.
30 shovelfuls of brown. A
Yes.
wheelbarrow of green to a wheelbarrow of brown, or 30 wheelbarrows of brown, and so on, right? Well, that's not how you calculate these things. These are based on weights, not on volume. And you can imagine in the fall, you've got all these leaves, right? They're fluffy and they make a big pile, but weight-wise, there's very little there.
Oh, like leaves to grass clippings. Grass clippings are dense and
Grass
heavy.
clippings are denser, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Wood trimmings are very dense compared to leaves.
I've always noticed if you gather leaves by just running the lawnmower with the bag,
Yeah.
they heat up. Like,
They,
because you're getting grass up and, like there's
Yep.
some grass coming in with them, right?
Yeah.
Like when I usually get leaves from people. They just leave them out. I'll gather them in my car on the way to work in the morning. And then you come back to the car and sometimes the car is all steamed up on the inside, it's all fogged. This happened to me a week ago. I had 3 bags that had leaves, but it was just leaves on the top. The bags were about 3/4 full of grass. And when I came out to my car, it looked like someone had taken a shower inside the car. It was all the windows were soaked, and it was from all the condensation from the heat inside those bags of grass. I mean, giant leaf bags, right? Full of grass, chock
Yeah.
full, and it was probably mowed at night when it was dewy. So it was pretty nasty. And I have hay fever. That was a rough drive home. I was wrecked.
Well, you see, one of the things you demonstrated, though, is that composting is really easy. It just happens.
Yes, it was happening.
Even if you don't mix it the right way, it happens on its own. So it is easy. Yeah.
Yes.
The third thing that's critical here is that when we talk about a ratio 30-to-1, we're talking weight, but we're also talking dry weight.
Oh.
Right?
Uh-huh.
So you just said your grass clippings were wet, right? Well, you got to dry them out and then weigh them.
Then they don't weigh anything. It's
Well,
all water, yeah.
Like these ratios, they come from lab research, and labs
Yes.
always report their data as, weight per unit dry weight.
Lab conditions.
Always dry, because the water makes such a big impact, right? Again, if we go back to leaves and grass, they're actually a good example. The leaves are quite dry. The grass clippings are wet. Well, you have to account for the moisture differences. Right?
Yes.
Whereas the other thing that happens is you go out one day and the leaves are nice and fluffy and they're all dry, and then it rains, and the next day you go to make your compost, they're all wet, right? So you can't weigh the wet leaves and the dry leaves and assume they're the same amount. So to do this properly, you have to use dry weight, which nobody knows. We don't have the numbers for that. We're not going to go and dry this stuff. We have to use weight, which means you have to have your scale out in your compost pile so you can weigh everything. Gardeners don't do that. And the browns and greens are just kind of an approximation, right?
Right.
So this whole idea of getting the ratios right, getting the ratio correct is important for fast compost, but it's not something the gardener can really do easily.
Right.
So the book has a couple of other alternatives to that. One is a simple way of just kind of putting things in piles, and I've done all those calculations for you and figured out what your approximate moisture level is and how do we convert weight to volume, and it actually allows you to do it by volume.
Oh, that's very helpful.
Another way you can do it is simply start piling stuff up and look at it. Okay, if you make a big pile and nothing happens, there's no heat, you don't have enough greens. You need more nitrogen in there, right? So you can add some greens, or you can add some nitrogen fertilizer, works just as well. On the other hand, if you pile this up and a couple days later it's nice and hot, but it really smells like ammonia, smells like urine, you've got way too much nitrogen. You got to throw in some more brown stuff.
Right. Like a pile of grass clippings will get kind of like that.
That's right. There's too much nitrogen in there, and so they start smelling, and they get slimy and wet and so on. Whereas if you mix that pile with brown leaves, that doesn't happen, right?
Yeah. That's right.
So one way to start out this process is just pile something up and see what happens, and then adjust it. And then once you've done this for a couple of years, you'll get a feel for how much of each you need. And the bottom line is it's not that critical. The stuff even composts in the back of your car, right?
Yes,
Um,
exactly.
so it will just be a little slower if you don't get the ratio right.
Yes.
I think before we started the program, we talked about this composting just by piling stuff up. You can go and get your leaves, make a pile, completely wrong ratio, and leave it. Okay, now it'd take a couple years in a cold climate, but eventually it's compost, right?
Yes.
So you can ignore all of that completely if you want to, or you can put a little more effort into it and make faster compost. Entirely up to you how much effort you want to put into this. But the idea of browns and greens is just a very, very rough approximation.
Hey, if you want to help support everything I'm doing here, go to Vessies.com to buy whatever you need for your garden this year. And use my coupon code GAVS23 to get free shipping as long as there's a pack of seeds in the order and there's no oversized items in the order. Check out the description box of this video for details. You can buy everything you need from Vessies. They have seeds, fruit bushes and trees, soil amendments, pest solutions, tools, clothing, and lots of other stuff too. So yeah, if you want to help support everything I'm doing here and they sell something you need, buy it from them using my coupon code. And happy gardening.